I wasn't supposed to stop that day. I was only in Seabrook for the weekend, a short, uncomfortable visit to my sister's place, the kind you both agree to out of obligation, but secretly hope the other cancels. I was driving along the coast road, watching the gulls circle low over the beach parking lot, when I saw it again, that old pawn shop with the faded red awning and crooked open sign. I'd passed it a dozen times over the years, but never went in. This time I turned in without thinking. 12 years had passed since my daughters vanished, and I hadn't stepped foot near this town in nearly as many. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to bury, and make sure no name stays forgotten. My name's Vanessa Cole. I'm from up near Greenville originally, but I raised my girls in a smaller town about 2 hours inland quiet place called Miller's Run. Back then, life was simple, not easy, but structured. My husband Derek worked long shifts at the plant, and I stayed home with our twin daughters Hannah and Elise. They were 6. The summer everything changed. We had a routine, the kind that made life feel solid: early breakfasts, PBS cartoons, library visits on Wednesdays. Every Saturday we'd drive down to the coast for sun-fried dough and sand, so fine it clung to your hair, no matter how many times you rinsed. Looking back, I remember how much I craved order, predictability. I believed in the kind of world where if you loved your kids and watched them close, you could keep them safe. But life doesn't always warn you when it's about to change. Sometimes it just folds in on itself quietly. That Saturday in Seabrook, I pulled into the pawn shop just for a distraction. The place looked like it hadn't changed in decades. Chipped siding, dusty windows, a bell over the door that rang when I stepped inside. It smelled like old books and rusted fishing gear. The man behind the counter barely looked up. I wandered the aisles without really seeing anything, just running my hand along wooden cabinet shelves full of tangled jewelry clocks that hadn't ticked in years. I don't know what drew my eye to the case in the far corner. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was just the way the light caught the glass. But there, nestled between a broken brooch and a plastic keychain, was a silver charm bracelet, slightly tarnished. 2 small letters hung from it, an H and an E. I froze. 12 years ago, I'd had 2 of those made. One for each of my girls. Identical, except for the letters. I remember kneeling beside them in the kitchen that morning, fastening the clasps around their wrists before we headed to the beach. I told them it was so they'd always have each other even if they ever got separated. The bracelet in the pawn shop wasn't just similar, it was the same. I could see the tiny nick on the E, the one Elise got when she dropped hers on the driveway. My throat tightened. My legs went stiff. I asked the man behind the counter where it came from. He shrugged, said someone brought it in a few weeks back. They didn't keep names unless it was a big-ticket item. Probably just part of a box of old stuff from a garage cleanout. I bought it. I didn't even ask for change. The drive back to my motel was a blur. That night I laid the bracelet on the nightstand and dug through my suitcase until I found an old Polaroid, the one I always kept tucked in a folder pressed between dog-eared maps and expired ferry passes. In the photo, Hannah and Elise stood barefoot on the Seabrook boardwalk in their swimsuits matching down to the pattern of their hair ties. Around their wrists, the bracelets gleamed in the sun. That was the last photo ever taken of them. 12 years and not a single lid. But now, this bracelet. This single piece of silver that shouldn't have survived, let alone ended up back here. I couldn't stop touching it, turning it over, holding it to the light. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be, which meant someone had held on to it for 12 years, and only now let it go. And as I sat there, knees to my chest, the ocean air heavy through the motel curtains, I realized something I hadn't let myself feel in a very long time. Hope. Real dangerous hope. The next morning, I went back to the pawn shop. I didn't go to browse this time. I went with the missing person flyer folded under my arm and my jaw set. And that's when everything started unraveling. Terry didn't look surprised when I came back the next morning. He barely glanced up from behind the counter, just muttered, "You again," like I was there to return a toaster. But I didn't come empty-handed this time. I walked straight up and laid the missing persons poster on the glass, flattening it with my palm. "This bracelet," I said, tapping the image. "It was brought in a few weeks ago. My daughter's disappeared 12 years back. I need to know who sold it." He let out a tired sigh, same one I remembered from the day before, and shook his head. "Told you we don't keep names." I pointed toward the corner where a small dome camera hung above the register. "But you keep cameras." That made him pause. He scratched at the stubble along his jaw and glanced toward the back room. "Footage loops every couple days. It's probably gone by now." I didn't budge. "You said this came in a few weeks ago. You must have seen who brought it in." Maybe it was my tone. Maybe it was something in my face. But he stood slowly and motioned for me to follow. We squeezed into a cluttered back office that smelled faintly of cigarettes and electrical dust. He dropped into a squeaky chair and clicked through folders on a monitor older than some cars I'd owned. "February 7th, he muttered. "That's when the box came in." He pulled up the security footage and played it at double speed. The pawn shop appeared from a corner angle entrance counter register. Nothing unusual at first. Then around midday, a girl stepped through the door. 16, maybe 17. Long sleeves pulled over her hands, dark hair tucked behind her ears. She didn't browse, just walked straight to the counter, pulled the bracelet from her pocket, and set it down gently on the glass. Waited for a nod, then left without a word. "Can you pause that?" I asked. Terry clicked and froze the frame just as she turned back toward the door. Her face was only in profile, but it hit me like a gut punch. The shape of her cheek, the slight downturn of her eyes, the way her mouth pressed in when she hesitated. I leaned in so close my breath fogged the screen. "I need a copy of that," I said. Terry hesitated. "Look, I could get in trouble. I'll pay you." He shrugged. "Just take a screenshot. Easier that way." My hands shook as I lifted my phone. I took 3 photos, the profile the moment her hand slid the bracelet forward and the second before she pushed open the door. Back at my place, I spread out old photos of the girls on the kitchen table. Most were worn at the corners. One still had a coffee ring in the corner from a night I didn't put it away fast enough. I compared each image to the still from the shop. It wasn't a perfect match. 12 years change a face. But some things don't change. The arch of an eyebrow, the tilt of a chin. A photo from the dunes caught my eye. Hannah with her bangs in her eyes. Elise grinning with one sock half off. They were wearing tank tops that day, bracelets on both wrists. I shifted them around like puzzle pieces, comparing angles, trying to align memories with reality. I didn't cry. I'd gone dry years ago. But there was something deeper now, an ache maybe, a hum under the skin, hope and fear locked in place. I pulled out an old phone book from the drawer, the pages warped and soft with time. Under A, my pen had once pressed so hard through the page that the name beneath was nearly illegible. Ames Yvonne. I dialed. The voice that answered was steady, slightly surprised, but professional. "Detective Ames. It's Vanessa Cole," I said. "You handled my daughter's case, Hannah and Elise Cole." There was a pause. "Of course I remember. How are you?" "I'm not calling to catch up," I said. "I found something. A bracelet. At a pawn shop. I'm sending you a photo." I texted it before she could ask. A minute passed. Then 2. Finally her voice came back slower now. "I can't say for certain, but I see what you're seeing. The profile, the eyes. There's something there. Can you run facial recognition?" "Possibly, but we'll need a clearer image. Even then, without prints or DNA, it's circumstantial." "So what do I do?" "We meet," she said. "Tomorrow morning. I want to see that footage myself." The air was thick with fog the next morning when I stepped into the corner cafe on Delaney and 6th. It hadn't changed. Wood paneling, chrome bar stools, that same stale coffee smell clinging to the curtains. Yvonne was seated in a back booth flipping through a weathered leather notebook. No badge visible, but she didn't need one. She carried the weight of it in her posture. I slid into the booth across from her and laid a manila envelope on the table. Inside was the still image and the bracelet itself, now sealed in a plastic bag. She looked at both hands, steady eyes scanning. "Custom job," she asked. "I had it made for their 8th birthday. Identical sets. Same chain. One with an H, one with an E." She nodded slightly, then turned her attention to the photo. "It's worth pursuing." We went through the original case file together. Witness reports, timelines, old tips that had dried up before they had time to breathe. One note stood out. A fishing boat had been docked off the boardwalk that afternoon. Not suspicious on its own, not with the charity event that weekend, but something about it stayed with her. I remembered it too. The crowd, the noise. I'd only turned away for a second to buy lemonade. There was a boardwalk employee I added. Said he might have seen the girls heading toward the pier. But he was vague. "Daryl Ling," she said. "Seasonal hire." We questioned him twice. Nothing concrete. Another page in the file caught her eye. A duplex near the edge of town had operated as a foster home for a few years, unlicensed under a woman named Lena Greer. Took in kids off the books. Some never got documented. "Wasn't followed up?" I asked. "It was shut down in 2012. Never found a tie to your girls." I pushed the photo across the table again. "I need to know who this girl is. I can't wait another 10 years. I'll put in a DMV request, see if facial recognition turns up anything. I'll check school records, traffic cameras. But this takes time." I gathered the photo, folded it slowly. "Then I'll find her myself." Her voice didn't waver. "Be careful where you poke. If she's tied to something larger, then it's already too late to be careful." I spent the next 2 days walking the blocks near the pawn shop. I carried a folded printout of the surveillance still, showed it to bookstore clerks, fruit stand owners, anyone who didn't wave me off. Most people shook their heads. Then an older woman at a sea glass bracelet kiosk paused. "I've seen her," she said. "Week or 2 ago. Hood up. Headed south. Didn't speak. South where I asked. Toward the marina." My breath caught. The old marina hadn't been used in years. Half the planks were missing. Boats rusted in their slips. I went anyway. The dock creaked beneath my feet. A sour smell of salt and mildew hung in the air. Toward the end of the walkway, nailed to a cracked wall near a dead electrical box, was a sun-bleached flyer. "Annual Seaside Youth Event," it read. "Sponsored by the Claire Parker Foundation." My stomach dropped. That name. It had been in the case file, Youth Outreach Foster Ties. I took a photo and turned back toward the lot. It was time to pay her a visit. The sign in front of the house was small hand-carved on driftwood. "Seaside Youth Arts Program. Claire Parker, Director." It looked ordinary. Pale blue siding, wind chimes, porch bench half covered in beach towels. I knocked. A teenage girl answered, apron streaked with dried paint hair pulled back in a loose bun. My breath hitched. It was the posture, the eyes, the chipped nail polish on her thumb. "Hi," she said. "Can I help you?" I cleared my throat. "Is Claire Parker available? I'm interested in your program." A woman's voice called from inside. "Haley." "Who is it?" My knees went weak. "Haley." The name was new, but the face wasn't. Claire Parker stepped into view, drying her hands. She looked mid-50s, controlled, polite. Her eyes didn't smile. "We usually ask visitors to reach out through our website," she said. "I was just in the neighborhood," I replied. "Work with a small arts foundation." Her eyes flicked toward the girl. "Haley, you have paint on your cheek." The girl wiped it and disappeared down the hall. "She's been with me nearly 10 years. Claire said casually as she walked me through a clean, cluttered living room that smelled faintly of coffee and turpentine. Paintings lined the walls, abstracts, oceans, sunsets. One showed two girls on a beach, a red boat drifting behind them. A shadow stood in the distance. Haley painted that last year, she said. She paints from memory or emotion. Not always clear. She's talented, I said. She's special, Claire replied. Been with me since she was 5. I didn't plan on becoming a guardian, but when you see a child who's lost, you try to do what's right. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I already knew what I saw. That was my daughter standing in the hallway, and she didn't know who I was. Not yet. But that was going to change. She didn't recognize me. I stood 10 feet from her in Claire Parker's living room, her with her hair tied back, a streak of paint on her apron. Eyes the same shape they were when she was 6, and there was nothing. No flicker, no pause, no instinct that told her who I was. She smiled politely, then disappeared down the hallway like I was just another visitor. Claire had called her Haley. The name didn't fit, but the face did. I held on to that face the whole way back to my motel, sat on the edge of the bed with the bracelet in my hand and the photo still tucked under my arm. I should have cried, but I didn't. Not yet. I called Yvonne instead. She picked up after 2 rings. Any luck, she asked. I saw her, I said. She answered the door. Claire's house. She's calling her Haley now. There was a pause on the line. Are you sure? Yes. Paint on her apron, hair up, same face. She looked right at me and didn't know me. Yvonne asked if I confronted Claire. I told her no. I said I played it like I was a donor interested in the program. Claire let me in. I saw the space paintings kids work, that same red boat showing up in the background of 3 different pieces. In one of them, there were 2 girls on the shoreline and a man standing behind them, blurred. Another painting showed a girl on a dock holding a balloon walking towards something you couldn't quite make out. It wasn't conclusive, but it was personal. Too personal. Did Claire mention the other girl? Yvonne asked. No, I said. Only Haley. No mention of Elise. Then we proceed carefully, she told me. We don't know how she ended up in Claire's care or how legal any of it is. If we push too hard and this isn't solid, we could lose both girls again. I didn't like it, but I understood. Yvonne had already started digging. That night, I stayed quiet. I didn't sleep. The bracelet sat on the nightstand, catching the motel's yellow light in a dull, steady glow. The next morning, I parked a few blocks from Claire's house and waited. The neighborhood was quiet. Wind chimes, trimmed hedges, tidy porches with summer flowers just starting to wilt. Through the window, I saw her again. Haley. My daughter was sitting at a small desk, working on a large sheet of paper. She painted with slow, focused strokes the way Hannah used to when she concentrated too hard to hear anything else. After a while, she reached up toward a shelf, knocked something over. A wooden box hit the floor and scattered. She dropped to her knees to clean it up, but then stopped. In her hand, she held a small photo, wrinkled and half-folded. She stared at it for a few seconds, then shoved everything back into the box, quickly locked it, and placed it aside. Her hands shook. She stood listening toward the hallway, but no one came. I didn't move from the car. That night, when the house was dark, she pulled the photo out from under her mattress and studied it again. It showed 2 little girls standing at a railing near the ocean, one holding a balloon, the other a lollipop. They were about 6. She didn't know why she remembered the moment, but she did. It didn't feel like a dream. It felt like something she'd lived. Down the hall, she heard the floor creak. She slid the photo into a book and pulled the blanket up around her shoulders. Claire stood in the doorway. You okay? Haley looked up. Where did I come from? Claire stepped in her robe, tied her voice even. What do you mean I found this photo? It looks like me. But there's another girl. She looks like me too. Claire stayed in the doorway. You were left at a shelter, she said. No ID, no family. That photo must be a mix-up. Sometimes the brain fills in what it wants. But it feels real, Haley said. Claire smiled gently. Memories do that. Don't chase ghosts. You have a life here. That night after Claire's light went out, Haley opened her tablet and typed in a name she didn't know she remembered until that moment. Hannah Cole. What came up stopped her cold. News articles, missing posters. A 6-year-old girl reported missing from the Seabrook Boardwalk in 2010, and beside her, in every photo, another little girl. Same height, same face, same day. Elise Cole. She looked at the photos one by one, reading through the old timelines, the quotes from a woman named Vanessa Cole, her mother. In one picture, Vanessa stood beside a police officer during a press conference holding a copy of the same image Haley had just found. She picked up the wrinkled photo again, stared at it side by side with the article. The resemblance wasn't just strong, it was exact. "That's my mom," she whispered. The next morning, I didn't knock. I just waited. I parked at the curb, folded into the seat, eyes fixed on the house. A little after 6, I must have dozed off. When I opened my eyes, the sun was just starting to warm the edge of the windshield. I heard a knock on the passenger window. It startled me. I turned. She was standing there. Her hair was down. She held a folder close to her chest. I unlocked the door. She climbed in. Neither of us spoke at first. We just sat there with the parking brake between us and years of silence thick in the space. Finally, she said, "I saw your face in an article. It said you were my mother." I nodded, swallowing hard. "You are my daughter." She looked down. "I needed to see you." We didn't talk fast. It wasn't that kind of moment. I told her little things, small pieces I thought she might hold on to. How she liked her sandwiches cut into triangles. How Elise always cheated at board games. How we used to dance in the kitchen to an old Beach Boys record until our socks wore out. She didn't say much, just nodded. Sometimes she smiled. Once she reached toward my wrist, touched the bracelet, then pulled her hand back. "I found this," she said, opening the folder. Inside was a photograph. Same one I'd seen her holding. The girls were standing on a dock, one with a melting popsicle, the other with her braid tucked over her shoulder. Behind them in the distance was a red boat moored beside a weathered boathouse. My stomach turned. "I know that boat," I said. "It belonged to a man named Donnie Ecker. He used to run private charters up the coast. The police questioned him after the girls vanished, but nothing stuck. No charges. He vanished not long after Lena's place was raided." She looked at the photo again. "Then maybe he took us." Maybe, I said. But if he did, then Claire knew. She had to. She nodded slowly, eyes still on the dock. "We have to find Elise," she said. I looked over at her at the way her jaw tensed when she said it. She wasn't crying. Neither of us were. It wasn't that kind of moment either, but we both knew. We couldn't go back, and we couldn't leave it here. We had to keep going. The days that followed felt like walking underwater. I was moving, talking, trying to piece things together, but there was a weight pressing down on every moment. Yvonne was already deep into digging through Claire Parker's records and the tangled threads that led back to Lena Greer, the woman who ran that unlicensed foster home just outside Seabrook. The place had shut down in 2012 after an investigation, but not before enough damage was done. Claire's name was tied to donations and visits, but no official paperwork. Everything about her guardianship was a sham. The more Yvonne pulled, the clearer it became. Claire had taken Hannah Haley as her own, off the books, no court orders, no legal adoption. From the outside, Haley was a foster child. In reality, Claire had been raising her as her daughter for nearly a decade. I sat at my kitchen table for hours, flipping through old case files, trying to connect dots that never seemed to line up. The police had chased leads, questioned seasonal hires like Daryl Ling, even checked the charity event on the pier where the girls disappeared. But there was always something missing, some loose end left untied. Then there was Wyatt Greer, Lena's son. Yvonne found him living in a run-down trailer a few hours inland. He looked worn, gaunt, the kind of man who's been hit by more than just life's punches. When I showed him the photo of the bracelet, his eyes flickered with recognition. He told me about that day, how a man came to pick up the girls, said it was a custody exchange. He wasn't involved in the plan, but was told to stay away, keep his mouth shut. He never met Claire, but he knew Lena. He spoke quietly about a basement in the foster home. One girl was taken away on a boat, the other was left behind. Elise. He hadn't seen her again after that. I drove home with the windows down, the salty air doing little to clear the fog in my mind. Hours later, I sat flipping through an old photo album, stopping on every picture of Hannah and Elise. Their third birthday missing teeth and matching swimsuits, little hands clinging to each other when the world felt too big. I pressed my hand against a photo I kept in my wallet, the last one taken before the boardwalk. My vision blurred. "I'm coming for you," I whispered, voice breaking in a way I hadn't allowed before. Yvonne's call came early the next morning, her voice low and tight. Claire's guardianship was fake, fabricated from the ground up. The adoption papers were lies. The company she used to cover it all, Golden Pine Services, had been shut down in 2013 after an interstate investigation. It was a front for shuffling kids into unofficial homes, places like Lena Greer's foster house. The paperwork wouldn't stand up in court, so she stole her, I said, barely above a whisper. "Not legally," Yvonne answered. "But from Haley's point of view, Claire is her mother, and she's not even close." I sat back, overwhelmed. Haley had no memory of her real name, her sister, or me. "We have to be careful," Yvonne warned. "If we move too fast, we risk losing them both." But I couldn't stop. I couldn't wait. I had to see Haley again. That afternoon, I went back to Claire's house. I parked a few doors down under the shade of a spreading elm and watched the pale blue siding, the porch with its chipped white railing, and those same wind chimes clinking softly in the breeze. I saw Haley through the window, seated at her desk, working on a painting. Her brush moved slowly, deliberately. She looked so much like Hannah, it made my chest ache. Then she knocked over a wooden box full of papers and trinkets. She froze when she spotted a crumpled photo and hid it away quickly. Her hands trembled as she locked the box. I stayed in the car, breath fogging the window. Later that night, Haley pulled the photo from under her mattress. Two girls on a dock holding hands with the ocean stretching out behind them. The red boat was faint, but there. She stared at it like it was a lifeline. Claire caught her with it and dismissed the photo as a trick of memory, told her she had a life now. But Haley wasn't convinced. When Claire's light went out, Haley searched her real name on the tablet, Hannah Cole, the missing child who vanished 12 years ago. Her own face stared back at her. I was outside the house, hand on the door, ready to knock but unable to. I stayed in the car, too afraid to wake her, too afraid to be too close. And then a soft knock came on the passenger window. Haley stood there holding a folder, close, pale, and quiet. She climbed in without a word, and we sat there, years of absence folding between us. She told me she saw my face in an article, that I was her mother. I told her she was mine. We spoke in fragments. Memories of sandwiches cut into triangles, the way Elise bent the rules to win board games, nights dancing to Beach Boys records. Haley didn't say much, but she listened. She reached out once to touch the bracelet on my wrist, the twin to the one she'd worn. Inside the folder was the photo she had hidden two girls on a dock, a red boat, a shadow in the background. I recognized the boat immediately. Donnie Eckers. The police had questioned him after the disappearance but never charged him. He vanished soon after Lena's place was raided. Haley looked at me, voice steady. "Maybe he took us." I nodded. But Claire had to know. We sat there, the air heavy with what we didn't say. We knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was the only one left. We had to find Elise. It's strange how quickly routine comes back even when everything you thought you knew has shifted. I kept moving as if on autopilot, answering calls, jotting down notes, tracing old names across yellowed notepads, always circling the same handful of details. Every time I thought about slowing down, I pictured Elise as she might be now 12 years older. Maybe out there alone, maybe waiting for someone to finally pay attention. Wyatt Greer's words looped in my mind. He said he'd seen one girl taken from the boathouse, the other he never saw again. Elise. I wondered if she remembered the sound of my voice, or if her memory had faded past the point of return. At night, I'd catch myself holding that old photo thumb pressed over the edge where her braid hung over her shoulder, hoping for something to shift. Haley was quieter than before, her focus sharpening into something almost brittle. Sometimes she'd spend hours sitting at the kitchen table with a sketch pad and a mug of untouched tea, drawing nothing in particular, just lines, little boats, the shadow of a dock. When I asked her what she remembered from those missing years, she shook her head. It's like looking through glass. I remember a woman with short hair, smelled like cigarette smoke and lavender. There was a door at the top of the stairs. It always stayed locked. She told me she used to hide things, note small toys, so no one could take them. I wondered if Elise did the same wherever she was. The next morning, a message popped up on my phone from an unfamiliar number. Hi, Vanessa. You don't know me, but I saw your post about the bracelet. I think I might have a photo you should see. Taken July 17th, 2010. Boardwalk thought it might help. The woman's name was Tamara Gutierrez. Attached was a single image slow to load, as if it knew how much waited inside it. Tamara and her family stood smiling in front of a snow cone stand, but in the background, off to the right, were two little girls in matching sundresses, candy-striped bags clutched in their hands. One of them had chocolate smeared across her cheek. The other was looking up at a man walking a few steps ahead, ball cap pulled low, a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt. His face was caught in profile, and a thin scar ran down the side of his neck. My chest tightened. I sent the image to Yvonne. Within 48 hours, she had a name. Wyatt Greer. He'd been hired that summer to help a boardwalk vendor with paddleboards and boat docking. No record at the time, but after a drug bust 2 years later, he vanished. We tracked him to a trailer park 3 hours inland. Yvonne made the call, but I went out myself. The heat was oppressive that day, thick and sticky. I pulled into the lot, my tires crunching over gravel, and knocked on the faded blue door. Wyatt answered, older than the photo, with arms covered in twitchy scars, a dirty t-shirt stretched thin across his shoulders. His eyes went straight to the printout I brought. That was me, he said, rubbing his neck. I remember those girls. I asked why he never came forward. He shrugged, eyes flicking to the ground. Guy told me it was a custody thing, said their mom couldn't come herself. I just helped get them to the dock. Small boat private. He loaded them in. Told me to stay back. My mind raced. What about Claire Parker? Wyatt shook his head. Never met her. But there was a woman named Lena who ran some kind of safe house. Claire used to visit sometimes, stay overnight. I pressed him about Elise. He looked down at his hands. Only saw one girl get taken from the boathouse. Never saw the second kid again. I felt that answer in my bones like cold water. Could she still be there? He shook his head. The place got raided for drugs a while after. He was gone by then. I left with more questions than answers. Driving back, all I could think about was how the stories never lined up, how every answer pointed to a new dead end. That evening, I sat with Haley at the kitchen table, old notes spread out between us. She studied the surveillance, still the Polaroid, the new photo Tamara had sent. She didn't speak for a long time, just ran her finger over the images. Finally, she said, "We're missing something." She was right. I retraced every detail, every list, every receipt. One thing kept coming back: the pawn shop. It started there. That was where I first found the bracelet. Maybe there was more. So we went back. The shop looked the same as ever, bell-chiming air thick with dust. Terry, the owner, didn't look surprised. I told him we were looking for anything else that came in with the bracelet. A box, a locket, anything. He thought for a minute, then pointed to a small glass case behind the counter. Bought a crate off a lady a few months back, clearing out her mother's place. Said her name was Claire. Didn't ask for ID. Haley and I stepped closer. Inside, nestled between faded cufflinks and a porcelain owl, was a gold locket worn smooth from years of fidgeting. I knew it immediately. It was Elise's. I'd given it to her on her 5th birthday. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. Terry wrapped it carefully, like he sensed it wasn't just another trinket. We left the shop with the locket in hand. In the parking lot, Haley said quietly, "Claire had both of us." I nodded, voice thick. She's known this whole time. At home, we laid the locket and the photos out on the kitchen table. The pieces were there waiting to be named. That night, Yvonne came by with a test kit. Haley agreed to the swab, and we sent it off for comparison. She was calm through the whole thing, her hands folded in her lap. "I need to be sure," she said. I watched her, so much older than the girl I remembered, but with the same look of stubborn resolve in her eyes. Before dawn, the call came. 99.9% probability Haley was Hannah Cole. I told her the news. She nodded and said I thought it would feel bigger, but I still feel like me. I told her we'd figure it out together. We stared at the locket, the clasp bent but still working, and the old photo of 2 girls by the dock. She gave it away, Haley said almost to herself. She gave Elise away. I reached for her hand. We sat like that until the sun rose a little closer than before, but with Elise still missing from the picture. That became our next promise. If she was still out there, we'd bring her home. Yvonne called early the next morning, her voice strained from lack of sleep. She had found something, a property connected to Lena Greer, that had slipped through the original investigation. The deed was buried under layers of shell companies and had changed hands right before Lena's foster home was raided. It sat about 30 minutes inland, far off the main road, nothing around it but rows of old trees and overgrown grass. There were no neighbors to notice comings and goings, and no reason for anyone to visit, unless they already knew what was hidden there. I stared at the black and white photo she slid across the table in the police station, the house half swallowed by vines and shadows. "You think she was kept there?" I asked, not sure if I could stand to hear the answer. Yvonne was quiet for a long moment. "It's the only place left we haven't checked." She called in a search warrant and assembled a small team. I don't remember the drive, just the tightness in my chest. Haley beside me in the passenger seat, her hands wrapped around the old photo of the dock and the red boat. The closer we got, the denser the woods grew, sunlight barely touching the cracked gravel that wound its way toward the house. When we arrived, it looked abandoned at first. Weather-beaten siding porch sagging toward the ground, a mailbox bent nearly in half, but a chain across the gate was newly broken. "This doesn't look abandoned," Yvonne said under her breath, checking her holster as 2 officers moved ahead to clear the house. The inside smelled like old carpet and mildew, but the kitchen was oddly clean. A single coffee mug in the sink, a dish towel still draped across the oven handle. We moved quietly, room by room. In the living room, a threadbare couch sat beneath a window covered in newspaper, a calendar from 2014 still pinned beside a yellowed rotary phone. Most of the bedrooms were empty. Closets held jackets in sizes too small for an adult, boxes of canned food, piles of faded children's books. We reached a door at the back of the hallway, painted a shade lighter than the rest, its handle new and the lock reinforced. One of the officers jimmied the lock and pushed it open. The smell changed immediately, cooler, dry dust heavy in the air. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust. There were drawings everywhere, hundreds of them overlapping and layered, taped to every inch of the wall. Crayon pencil bits of torn paper. Most showed the same themes: twin girls on a shoreline. The red boat drifting just out of reach. The silhouette of a faceless woman in the background, sometimes a shadow with one arm stretched between them. The repetition was suffocating. Haley stood in the middle of the room, hands over her mouth. She never stopped drawing, she whispered. There was a rug in the corner edges curled up at the sides. An officer knelt and pulled it back, revealing a metal ring set into the floorboards. We all paused. I felt my heart beating in my ears. With a grunt, one of the officers pried open the trapdoor. Cold air rushed up from below, tinged with earth and something stale. A steep wooden staircase led down into darkness. The first officer went in, flashlight swinging side to side. Clear, he called, voice echoing up. Then, "Wait. There's someone here." I didn't wait. I moved past the others, peering down the steps. In the far corner of the small concrete room, a girl sat curled on a mattress, knees hugged to her chest. Her hair was long, tangled, and dirty. A blanket was pulled around her shoulders, and she blinked against the flashlight, her eyes enormous in the gloom. For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was my own breathing and the slow ticking of a clock somewhere above. "Elise," I said, my voice barely carrying. She flinched, curling tighter. Haley pressed close beside me at the top of the stairs. "Is that her?" she whispered. The girl looked up slowly. Her lips parted, then closed again. Her eyes were glassy and unfocused. Yvonne's hand landed gently on my arm. "Let medical go first," she said. "She's been down here too long." I nodded, unable to do much more than that. My knees went weak, so I dropped to the floor beside the opening hand covering my mouth. It was her. It was Elise. Paramedics arrived quickly and took over, speaking in low voices, shining gentle lights in her eyes, wrapping her in warm blankets. She didn't resist, but she didn't speak. Her movements were stiff, mechanical, like she was still waiting for something to go wrong. They carried her up the stairs, past the drawings, out into the daylight for the first time in years. We followed the ambulance to the hospital, the drive impossibly long. In the family waiting room, I sat with Haley and Yvonne, the locket, and the photo laid out between us like evidence. No one talked much. A nurse brought coffee, which went cold on the table. After the doctors finished their assessment, Yvonne sat with us, clipboard in her lap. "She's alive. That's what matters," she said quietly. "No acute injuries, severe dehydration, mild malnutrition, but the real damage. That'll take time." I asked if I could see her. "Soon. They're stabilizing her." Haley sat with her knees pulled to her chest, sketchpad in her lap, head bent low. "I want to stay with her," she said, "if she'll let me." I squeezed her hand. "We're not going anywhere." When the doctor finally waved us in, the room was dim, curtains drawn tight. Elise lay on her side, staring at nothing, her fingers picking at the edge of the blanket. She didn't react when we entered, but when Haley sat beside her and began to draw, Elise turned slightly, eyes darting between the lines, taking shape on the page. I watched, not moving, afraid to interrupt whatever silent recognition might pass between them. For the first time in years, all three of us were in the same room. The damage wasn't gone, but the distance had closed at least a little. That night, as the machines beeped softly and the city lights glowed beyond the window, I knew we had come as close to the truth as we ever would. But the question that had haunted me for 12 years was finally starting to answer itself. The days that followed at the hospital were a blur of gentle routines and suspended time. Elise slept with the lights dim, always a blanket curled under her chin, waking in starts if a door opened too quickly or a monitor beeped too loud. She ate little, spoke even less, her eyes scanning each room with suspicion that came from years of learning the world was not safe. There was no grand reunion, not the way you see on TV. She looked at me like I was someone she'd met once and wasn't sure she wanted to meet again. The doctors said her physical recovery would be straightforward. Mild dehydration, underweight, but nothing their staff couldn't address. The trauma was something else entirely. When she did speak, it was in fragments, colors, sounds, sometimes a line from a lullaby she didn't quite finish. She would hum while Haley drew beside her, filling page after page of a sketchbook with soft pencil lines offering the silence of a sibling instead of questions. Most of the time, I just sat in the chair near the window bracelet, twisting in my hands, listening to the soft shuffling of nurses' shoes outside. It was Yvonne who moved things forward. She brought a folder to the cafeteria one night, slumped into the plastic chair across from me, her coat heavy with lint, eyes glassy from too many late shifts. She spread out the paperwork in silence. Claire knew about both girls. Lena Greer was the link. Claire made a deal through her, took Hannah because she was healthy and bright. Elise, she was seen as too difficult. So they left her behind. I didn't speak. My hands curled on the edge of the table, knuckles white. Yvonne went on. Somewhere between the safe house and that basement, Claire came back and told Lena not to mention the second girl. She discarded her, I said, barely louder than a whisper. Yvonne's voice softened. She didn't win. You found her. The words hung between us, heavy as grief, but I knew she meant them. The first time Elise spoke to me, it was late the hallway outside her room, quiet except for the rattle of the ice machine. Haley had gone to call a friend, and I was flipping through old photos, showing her one from the summer before they vanished, her and Hannah on the beach, soap bubbles in the air, both of them with ribbons in their hair. I slid the photo onto the bed. Elise stared, brow wrinkling. I think I remember you, she said softly. My heart hammered. I reached for her hand, but stopped short. I never forgot about you. I told her, willing her to believe it. I never stopped. She nodded, eyes not leaving the picture. The next morning, Derek showed up for the first time in years, carrying a battered photo album and a vase of yellow carnations. He looked smaller than I remembered, hair gone gray at the temple's shoulders drawn in. Haley didn't say much when he walked in. She stood near the window, arms crossed, watching him the way you watch a stranger you're supposed to know. He started quietly, showing Elise old pictures, birthday cakes, beach trips, the backyard swing she used to fight her sister for. Elise listened, sometimes touching the photos, sometimes not. Derek pointed to a picture of a cake with purple frosting. You picked that color, he said. You hated it, but you wouldn't let anyone else decide. For a long time, she just stared at the page, then reached out and brushed the corner with her finger. I stood in the doorway, unsure what to feel. Relief tangled with resentment, hope knotted with sorrow. No one said the word forgiveness, but it was there in the room, uneasy and unfinished. By the end of the week, the news had broken. Elise's rescue was everywhere, old footage from the Amber Alert side by side with hospital photos and Claire Parker's mugshot. Strangers sent flowers to the nurse's desk and reporters camped outside the entrance. I kept the television off and sat by Elise's bed, hands folded in my lap, watching her sleep in the blue morning light. Haley stayed every night, never pressing her sister for memories, just sitting close, their knees, sometimes touching under the blanket. If Elise wanted to draw, Haley would hand her a pencil and wait. Sometimes late at night, I'd wake to the sound of their voices in the dark, talking quietly, just above a whisper, the kind of conversation that builds trust by not asking too much. Little by little, Elise drew again, boats, sunrises, two girls on a shoreline, always with a shadow between them. I kept all her drawings in a shoebox at the foot of the bed, too fragile to put on the walls just yet. When the time came for discharge, the hospital therapist pulled me aside and said, "She may never tell you everything. That's okay. Give her space to heal in her own way." I nodded, carrying that advice out into the parking lot under the gray sky, feeling the weight of what we'd all survived. That afternoon, as I settled Elise into the back seat, buckling her in with careful hands, Haley slid into the passenger seat, clutching her sketchbook. I watched the two of them in the rearview mirror, quiet still, but no longer lost. The road home felt different. No music, just the hum of the tires and the faint scent of carnations on the dash. For the first time in years, I let myself believe that we might be able to rebuild, even if the pieces would never fit the way they once did. The aftermath was nothing like I'd pictured in those restless nights over the years. There was no clean sense of victory, no moment where everything clicked neatly back into place. Instead, there were meetings and paperwork, the hush of law enforcement stepping in at last, and the headlines that rolled across TV screens and newspapers with words like miracle and justice that never quite captured the shape of what we'd lived. The case wasn't cold anymore. Claire Parker was taken into custody. Her mugshot broadcast next to grainy images of her at charity events and art shows, as if the two versions of her might cancel each other out. She was charged with fraud obstruction and knowingly harboring a minor. Lena Greer was also brought in on old warrants that stretched back to the years she'd shuffled children through her doors. Wyatt Greer, in a turn I never saw coming, agreed to cooperate, filling in details about the trust that paid for the property, the fake adoption paperwork, and the movements of that red boat. For the first time since 2010, the truth wasn't just a private ache. It was out in the world, formal and undeniable. In the hospital, the news traveled in ripples. Nurses started knocking a little more gently, pausing to check if we needed anything. Strangers left flowers at the front desk, and a few local reporters tried to hang around the parking lot until hospital security moved them along. I kept the shades drawn, muted the TV, and did my best to give Elise and Haley a place where they could be unseen, where nothing was asked of them but to heal, however slowly that might come. Elise struggled the most with the noise of it all. The bright lights and unfamiliar voices left her flinching eyes, darting to the door hands curling into fists around the hospital blankets. The doctors said she was making progress. Her weight was up, she was no longer dehydrated, but the real work was deeper. Memory, they told me, wasn't just a series of facts. It was the fabric of safety. She didn't like mirrors. She startled at loud voices and needed the lights low. The doors always cracked so she could hear footsteps before anyone entered. She drew constantly, sometimes quietly, humming, filling page after page with those same repeating shapes. Shorelines, small boats, two figures standing together, a single bright balloon drifting off to one side. She didn't talk about the basement, and I didn't press. Haley found her place as her sister's shadow, never far, always patient. She sat on the edge of the bed, feet tucked underneath, bringing colored pencils and fresh sketchbooks, sometimes only drawing lines, letting silence be their conversation. She was the only one Elise seemed to trust, the only person who could coax her out of herself for more than a few minutes at a time. Watching them, I realized that some things couldn't be repaired, at least not to how they were. But something new was growing in those hours, a quiet alliance, a shared language of patience and presence that didn't depend on words or memory. The police came by for interviews each time, apologizing for the intrusion. I sat across from Yvonne, watching her go through every page, every photograph, every bit of evidence that had built up and scattered over a decade. Claire knew Yvonne told me. She picked Hannah because she was the easy one, healthy, outgoing. Elise was left behind. When she asked about her, Lena told her not to worry. As far as the paperwork showed, there was only one child. I listened, hands folded tight, my mind cycling back through every moment I'd spent searching. Yvonne's voice was steady, but I could see the toll it had taken her eyes, tired, shoulders bent under the weight of too many cases that ended without resolution. "You found her," she said quietly. "That doesn't always happen." I didn't answer. I didn't know how. The news cameras eventually moved on new stories, drawing their focus away. Life shrank back to quieter rooms and routines. Derek visited more often. He brought takeout and stood awkwardly by the door, unsure how to fit into a family he'd once left behind. Sometimes Haley would join him in the kitchen, the two of them talking softly while Elise and I sat together at the table, not speaking, just coloring. The hospital therapists worked with Elise twice a week, helping her build new routines and learn to trust that she was safe. Some afternoons, the three of us would walk outside, staying close to the parking lot, the air heavy with the scent of summer grass and distant ocean. Haley would walk a few paces ahead, pausing whenever Elise stopped to watch a bird or a passing car, her patience endless. As the weeks turned into months, healing became a slow, looping journey. There were nights Elise woke up screaming, tangled in sheets, her eyes wild until she saw Haley and me by her side. There were good days, too, when she laughed at something silly or showed me a drawing she'd finished, her hand trembling just a little less. Each time I told myself it was enough. I didn't need everything back. I just needed them safe together and finally allowed to take up space in the world as themselves. In the quiet after each storm, with the windows open and the world outside just out of reach, I would catch the faintest sound of laughter down the hallway. For the first time in years, I let myself hope that was enough. The truth, once it's out, doesn't fix everything. It just makes the silence a little lighter. After the news faded and the courtrooms emptied, life found a quieter shape. Elise stayed close, always needing someone nearby, always double-checking the locks. She still flinched at unexpected sounds, still asked for the hall light to stay on at night, but little by little she started to trust the world again. Haley Hannah settled into her name the way you ease into a worn jacket. Some days she was Haley, especially at the art center where her story was private and her sketches were loud. Other days she let herself be Hannah, and sometimes she just sat with her sister sharing the silence they'd both learned to live inside. Derek came around more, never pretending he could make up for lost years, just showing up, helping with errands, sharing old photos, leaving space for forgiveness to do what time alone couldn't. Yvonne visited sometimes, long after the case was closed. She'd bring coffee and stay for an hour, always keeping one eye on the door, but less out of habit, more out of care. She never said much about the investigation anymore, just asked how the girls were doing, how I was sleeping, if I needed anything. There was no simple healing, no clean slate. Elise's drawings now fill the walls of our home, most of them showing the sea. Two girls walking together. Sometimes a red boat disappearing into the horizon. Sometimes she adds a third figure, a tall shadow holding their hands, all of us walking away from the water. Some nights I watch her in the kitchen, quietly painting as the day closes, and I realize we survived, not because we were strong, but because we refused to stop looking. It isn't closure, not the way people talk about on television. It's learning to live with the questions that never go away. I've stopped searching for a reason why this happened to us. I think in the end, what matters is what we do with what's left. I spend my days at the Sunrise Art Center, now helping other kids find their voice through color and line, hoping that if nothing else, no one in our town ever feels invisible again. The old ache still comes back when I hear a certain song or pass a familiar corner, but now it feels softer, folded into the life we've built together. If you've listened this far, I hope you hold your loved ones close. Remember those who are missing and know that some stories don't end, they just keep echoing forward. If our story meant something to you, share it so no name and no child ever fades away in silence.